White House has just announced that President Trump's embattled pick to be the next VA secretary, Dr. Ronny Jackson, is withdrawing from consideration. This comes after days of disturbing allegations about professional misconduct that forced senators to postpone his confirmation hearing. Let's get right to CNN's Abby Phillip, live at the White House. This is not a shocker. What do we know about the calculation?
Not a shock at all. In many ways, very much expected. The White House said last night that it was Ronny Jackson's decision, and he made it this morning, saying in a statement that he would withdraw from consideration to be the VA secretary. He vehemently denies the allegations against him. As you mentioned, several sources have come forward, both to reporters and to the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, alleging that he misused his position to prescribe medications loosely, was intoxicated on the job on several occasions. But Jackson says none of those things are true. And then he adds that unfortunately, because of how Washington works, these false allegations have become a distraction for the president and the important work we must be addressing, how we give the best care to our nation's heroes. Now, this is just another roadblock for this White House that has really struggled to get their cabinet nominees confirmed. They've also had a lot of issues with ethics in the president's cabinet, and Republicans are growing frustrated that this is one in a bigger pattern of this White House not vetting nominees before they come to the Senate for confirmation. But this morning, the president is going to be speaking just shortly in an interview on Fox News, and Jackson is out. They will now have to find someone else to fill that critical VA position, Chris.
So, Abby, listen, we're just getting the statement from Ronny Jackson, and I just want to read a portion of it. Going into this process, he says, I expected tough questions about how to best care for our veterans, but I did not expect to have to dignify baseless and anonymous attacks on my character and integrity. The allegations against me are completely false and fabricated. So why is he dropping out?
Well, clearly, he's right about one thing. It is a huge distraction for this White House. But beyond that, Allison, we should also point out there were questions about Jackson's qualifications to run this massive federal bureaucracy, more than 300,000 employees, having no real experience in government. He is a doctor. He is an officer in the military. But a lot of Republicans and Democrats were concerned that he simply was not qualified. So that would have been one hurdle to overcome. A second hurdle with all of these allegations being brought forward by, in some cases, almost 24 sources, according to the Democrats on the Veterans Affairs Committee, it would have been very difficult for him to be confirmed to this position, especially considering that Republicans have a very narrow majority in the Senate. They could not afford to lose anyone virtually. It is also virtually unprecedented for a VA nominee to not get overwhelming support. And Jackson, at the very least, was looking at a very, very difficult uphill battle for confirmation.
All right, Abby, let's bring in John Avalon here. It's also unprecedented to put somebody like Ronny Jackson up for the VA job. This is a job that is very intense. It has been a failure for so many with very good credentials. That was the problem for Ronny Jackson coming into this, is that it was about the president liking him. His performance in a press conference where he came up with that magical number about the president's weight and overall fitness.
And longevity.
He could live to be, what, 200?
200.
Right?
Yes.
Right? Which is better. Trump said a little low, but a good start. But that was his problem. He's never done anything like this. The personal things were piled on top of that.
That's exactly right. This ultimately is a problem of Donald Trump's own making, because it was an impulsive decision based on whether he personally liked Ronny Jackson. And part of the tragedy and the radius of damage, I think, is that Dr. Jackson had been someone who was praised by presidents of both parties. People had worked with him. But by nominating somebody who did not have the relevant experience, who had not been properly vetted, somebody who, when he floated it in conversations in the White House, people thought the president was joking. He set up Ronny Jackson to fail. And these allegations that came out, all anonymous, but a high number of them, 23 individuals allegedly speaking out against him, that just created a completely untenable situation politically. But the fundamental flaw was the nomination and the lack of experience to do the job, the difficult job that is running the VA.
So, David Gregory, the president really likes Ronny Jackson, as did President Obama. Can he stay on as the White House physician now?
Well, you know, I don't know what all the tension will be on that. I mean, the president could say, yes, I like him, I want him, and I don't know if there'll be pushback from the military on that, given this. I simply don't know and wouldn't speculate on this. I think it's going to be difficult, given these allegations. I think, Jackson followed the script really that the president laid out for him, which is, why do I need this? You can deny the allegations, avoid trying to disprove them, and avoid a kind of a fuller airing of those allegations. And by the way, more cynically, the White House could use this to then go after Democrats, ignoring the Republicans' concerns or indifference toward Jackson, and say this was just a smear job against him. But, it goes back to what John was talking about this morning. The White House has to own this. Whatever the circumstances, this was a nominee that went bad. They're barely getting Pompeo through. They got problems with Scott Pruitt. And this is because this is how the president operates, impulsively. And in choosing Jackson, again, I'll go back to what I said earlier in the morning, which is I think there's a lot that's very curious about this, that people have come forward after he's been in a job like this, which is pretty sensitive for a long time. But these are pretty serious allegations that he would have to deal with. And for the White House to take on this fight that looks like a losing fight would be a lot.
Well, look, as we all know, when you really believe that they have nothing on you, it is easier to have the resolve to stay in. We also don't know that it was really Ronny Jackson's choice here. The president is the one who has to drive this. It's his choice. Abby, David Gregory is, of course, correct when he says the White House needs to own this. He also knows very well, as do you, that they won't. Right? This will be about them saying that this is your fault, Abby, you and the media, unfair witch hunt, this time on Ronny Jackson, unfair on the Democrats, unfairly going after him like they are with Pruitt. Isn't that the expected pushback here?
Well, we've already heard that from them, Chris. In the last several days, the talking points from this White House have been that these allegations are unfair, that they really shine a bad light on Ronny Jackson because the media is perhaps going after him or giving voice to his political enemies. And even if that is true, the underlying fundamental problem here is that Ronny Jackson was not vetted for this position before he was named. The White House was caught flat-footed, unable to defend him in the early stages when some of these allegations first emerged. And then it really snowballed after that. They came into this confirmation process really unprepared for what is actually a pretty standard practice in the process of confirming people in Washington, that you go through a confirmation process. It's advice and consent on the part of the Senate, where they look into the person's background. They have hearings on the subject matter. People come forward as character witnesses. And in that process, negative information can and does come forward. In this case, Ronny Jackson has the presumption of innocence. All of these are allegations, of course. But clearly, this was a White House not prepared to defend them. They didn't know all the facts behind the situations, and he was left out to dry. But I think a lot of Republicans are saying right now even that this is not anyone's fault, but the people who are supposed to be shepherding their nominee through what is always a very difficult process, but especially in this particular job.
And Chris, let me just make one point that I think may be obvious, but I think it's worth saying. In Washington in particular, whether it's in political circles or whether it's in media circles, when there's blood in the water, when you are injured, you have to have somebody who is prepared to stand by you in a really big way. And in this case, it would have been the White House being prepared to knock back these charges and knock them back hard. As Abby says, they were not prepared to do that. They were blindsided by that. And when it gets this far afield and there's that much blood in the water, it's just almost impossible to hang on.
But that also requires them knowing the fact pattern and doing the work beforehand, which is counter to impulsive discussions. But as Harry Truman once said, if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog.
John, another question is, what's the path forward? So Caitlin Collins of CNN has reporting that part of why it took so long to get rid of David Shulkin, who was the last VA secretary, even though President Trump didn't feel that he shared his opinion about privatization, et cetera, was because there was nobody else. And then it was like, he was thunderstruck when he realized that he could do Ronny Jackson, whom he likes so much, who's his personal physician. So now what? Who's going to head the VA?
Well, that becomes the big X factor. Remember the drip, drip, drip against Shulkin over a period of months. Someone who had been an Obama appointee, widely respected, backed by many veterans, members of the veterans community, but who the White House kept hanging out to dry, and some ethical concerns adding to his problems, but also some sort of, opposition inside the administration. Dr. Jackson had that personal connection with Trump based on loyalty, but that obviously isn't sufficient to run this massive bureaucracy that still needs reform. Who he will be replaced by is an utter X factor at this point.
Hey,
And
Abby,
it's so important. If I can just say, Chris, it's so important because we know the trail of tears of difficulty of the VA and how it affects our men and women who are coming back from combat after Afghanistan and Iraq. There's so many well-documented cases. We talk about a big bureaucracy, but it is awful. So it's important to move on, to get closer to a solution, because dragging out is only going to make it worse.